Somebody DJing?
Yeah.
Where is that me?
Yeah, I think it's
Is it me?
Somebody DJing?
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Where is that me?
I'm not sure what that was. I'm gonna mute
I think
on my
it's-
end though.
I'm back. How are you?
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, and you? Hi, Ingrid. Hi, Larry.
What's up?
Good, and you?
Good, good. You know, doing our part to keep people's spirits up. You know, it's been interesting. I mean, there was a point where people were like, "Oh, let's Zoom," and I was like, "Nah." 'Cause I was doing like 5-6 hour Zoom meetings, and it's just like, this is ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
You
Oh,
know?
okay, I think. Oh, okay. So people can already hear us actually.
Oh,
Hi,
okay.
people can hear each of you.
What's up,
Okay.
Atu? Welcome in Atlanta, via Ghana.
Okay, so now we have to be serious.
Our pleasure. Yeah. Who else is in here?
I was just waiting on Danny.
Yeah.
Okay. Have y'all been doing a lot of virtual like meetings and stuff like that?
Personally, no. This is the first one.
Oh wow.
I kind of refuse all of them because I really, I mean, no, people are hearing us now, so.
Okay. Oh, just one person.
Just
It's
one.
just that too. Because you can.
No, 21 people.
Are they? Where they at? I don't see them. Are they hiding?
Participant 21.
Okay. What's up, everybody? Oh, okay. Is it loading it up? Hey, Danny.
Janine did propose this meeting over wine and mimosas.
No, I'm drinking water.
I got a movie. Hold on. Let me exit this.
Ah, Danny's here.
Hello, hello.
Hey, how are you?
Okay, put this on.
Okay. Where's the chat? The chat is going. Okay.
All right. So we have 2 minutes. We're about to start. There is a live stream on YouTube.
Okay.
I'm copying that link and putting it in the chat. So in the event that you have any of your people who are like, I can't get in or something like that, you can just send them this link and they should be able to follow along. So I'm gonna put it here so it's public, everybody can see it.
Okay.
And I'm gonna mute and I will hit the record button, and Mike, when you're ready, man, you can get it started.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Wilson, and thank you for joining the second installation of the ADAMA Art Salon, which is hosted by the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta. This is an interactive panel, so we'll be fielding questions from the Q&A box, so you'll find it at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Also, if you're interested in attending future ADAMA salons, or you'd like more information about the museum or want to support, please visit adamatl.org, ADAMATL.org. So last week was an amazing panel featuring artists Bisa Butler, Alexi Peskin, Fahamu Peku, Delphine Fondu, and was hosted by Nyama Sophia Sandy. It was an amazing panel. This salon is actually going to feature some prolific curators and art historians. So I have the pleasure of conversing with Larry Ossei-Mensah out of the Bronx, New York. He's co-founder of Art Noir, Global Art Collective, and the former Susan Field Hilberry Senior Curator at MoCAD in Detroit. We also have Janine Gaëlle out of Morocco, who is a current exhibitions director at the Museum of African Contemporary Art in Al Madine in Marrakech, Morocco. We have Ingrid Lafleur, currently in Johannesburg, who is a curator, pleasure activist, and Afrofuturist. And she's a social impact advisor for the Detroit Blockchain Center and founder and director of the Afrofuture Strategies Institute. And we have Mr. Legacy Brothers himself, Danny Dunson out of Chicago, curator, art historian, who's most recently served as the editor-in-chief of artx.net, and he's a current curator of My Granddaddy's Closet. So this conversation is really going to discuss being a global curator and their experiences, ideals, and challenges of curating as a whole, but especially during this time. Before I start the questions, I'd really be remiss not to mention the passing of our beloved David Driscoll. You know, many of us would not even be in the field if it wasn't for him or people like him. And I'm very appreciative of all the contributions that he's made, not just in my career, but I'm sure that he's also made in yours. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to use Brother Driscoll as a way to start off the our first question. So I have this quote from David Driscoll. The quote says, "I feel that I have a calling, a priestly mission, so to speak, one to tell the story of my people, of the struggle of their artistry, from the time that my forebears left the continent of Africa, not of their own free will, but because they were forced migrants. I feel that this mission is so strong that I have to go into other parts of the world to tell that, yes, African Americans have a glorious past, a past which goes all the way back to the days of Ifa and Benin, and that we are descendants of such stock, that our people have come through so much to be where they are and what they are today. And this means that with that kind of tradition, African Americans have a glorious future." So what I got from this is that within Driscoll's art making philosophy, he acknowledges how his existence, it extends through the diaspora and back to Africa. And what I wanted to start off with is I wanted to discuss your philosophy of curation, and how would you define and contextualize your particular philosophy and role as a curator in society? Let's start off with Larry.
I think for me, it definitely aligns with a lot of the things that you just shared from Dr. Driscoll's quote. For me, it's actually kind of changed and evolved over time, which is kind of interesting, because for me, it started with not seeing enough platforms for Black and Brown artists. And this was over a decade ago, before, you know, it was kind of more within the mainstream like it is right now. And now I think it's, for me, this searching, you know, to find myself and locate myself in these conversations, you know, someone who's first generation Ghanaian American, and kind of, you know, straddling that line and you know, or beginning to erase that line and not be so obsessed with the distinctions between African American, African, Caribbean, Afro, South American, Afro-European, and really trying to see where is there more connective tissue, and how can that connective tissue be a space for us to learn more about each other, and then learn more about ourselves. So it's become a lot more self-reflective in an interesting way, with the hopes that other people see things, parts of themselves within an exhibition or formats like this, and become inspired and want to do, you know, more research or follow particular artists or things of that nature. So I think it shifted from being focused on platforming peripheral voices to now thinking about my voice, and it kind of now it's just kind of back and forth.
Ingrid, would you like to jump in?
Oh, you're on mute.
Hello. Yeah, yes, I know. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So my curatorial practice has definitely evolved over time. Moving back home to Detroit about 11 years ago, definitely changed the practice from when I was coming from New York, where I was just really thinking about more Black people collecting artwork and making sure that we own our own cultural property, to a more activist approach. And because I focus on Afrofuturism, I really do see it as more of a liberatory practice. So I'm all about creating portals of liberation through the artwork that I curate, through these exhibitions, and then also creating a new relationship to the Black body. And that is part of the liberatory practice, where I really believe Black, white, blue, green, everybody needs a new relationship to the Black body in order to really combat anti-Blackness, to do the true decolonization that's necessary for our survival. And Detroit, for those of you who might not know, is 85% Black. So this is very critical for our own development, because we're facing not only institutionalized racism, but spatial racism and economic oppression of of another kind. So me just being a curator before, just really like showing work that I really am enjoying, now it's very, very intentional. And really trying to kind of tackle some of those socioeconomic challenges.
What about you, Larry?
Me?
Oh, excuse me, Danny.
Like, I can talk more.
Hello, everyone. Again,
Hey.
I'm trying to remember like some of the details of the original question. We're talking about, I believe, the impetus of our curatorial practice and how that began for all of us. And mine started primarily in research. So I was interested in the writings and the scholarly work of many art historians and also professional curators who contributed to a body of discourse. And it led me to start my own research question. And my research question is based in this idea of deviating from the concept of the Black body and dealing with the concept of the Black soul and the Black interiority. And often when we use that term, we're conflating those words together. But I also realize we're like one of the only groups who uses that term Black body. And it's meant, when we say it, it's meant to conceptualize the mind, spirit, and body. But I believe words have a very particular power. And I realized that I wanted to deal with the interiority through portraiture. And there's a history within the Western canon of depicting the Black body without its own personhood. So I started thinking about this master narrative that takes the Black person out of personhood and humanity and kind of reduces it to something subhuman, and how that built a complete system, an economic system primarily, and how that system works. And there's a master narrative that not only empowers the oppressor, but also creates a pathology within the people being oppressed. So they begin to subjugate and oppress each other interpersonally. So I was wondering how that plays out pictorially, historically. And I think the biggest thing is for me was to do the connective lines from origins of a ancient and contemporary past, and ancient past and a contemporary present within the continent of Africa and all throughout the New World. And also take a look at the Western canon as well, and how many contemporary artists are also working within this same paradigm of the Black figure in opposed to the Black person and the Black human. So I'm dealing with those questions. Is something I'm dealing with. And curatorially, I always represent figurative works, portraiture, And I'm constantly looking for these different clues and these different insights into how our humanity has been oppressed for the elevation of another group's humanity. And so through my curatorial practice, I'm looking to answer those questions and also represent something that's on a higher plane that elevates the oppressed to a level that should always be, which is one of being human.
What about you, Janine?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me, Fahamu and Michael. For me, I think curating comes from a place of emotion. I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I met a curator who told me that he said, we curate emotions. And that's something that kind of resonates to me as I think, you know, it's something very subjective. And also I have this quote from Edouard Glissant who said, that says, I can change through exchange with the other without losing or diluting my sense of self. So for me, first of all, art is meant to bring the communities together and build the community and strengthen communities. So when I think about creating, it always has to do with emotion. And according to a project I have curated in Florence or here in Marrakech, and also, I mean, I was born in Cameroon, I'm French and Cameroonian, and I lived in Paris, and I spent 10 years in Italy, and then now it's been 2 years in Marrakech. So it's also a way of, you know, reflecting on, you know, how we connect and how we interact with each other and how we tell each other's stories by also, you know, being faithful to ourselves and also celebrating our common cultures, you know.
So one of the things, well, there are actually several connective threads I see within all of your work. You know, in addition to talking about them being liberatory practices, just this notion of community connection and connectivity as a whole within the subject. And I find that really interesting in what we're experiencing right now, because, you know, with these, you know, stay-at-home orders and social distancing, you know, how are we engaging in forms of, you know, in connectivity? So what I would like to know, and it's in no particular order, so, you know, feel free to jump in. How do you see the curatorial practices currently changing and may potentially change permanently throughout what we're seeing right now in the midst of, you know, COVID-19, this worldwide pandemic? And it's for anyone to jump in when you feel.
Michael, I think we're all a little bit hesitant to answer that question because it's acknowledging a global shift and a professional shift, one that we, in some ways, we welcome, and then in some ways it's quite alarming. But I do think what this does cause is a different type of connectivity. One that depends a little bit less on some of the performative qualities that we all know about the art world. You know, we get very dressed up and we kind of gather in these places, and a lot of times the art isn't even looked at an opening, right? We're looking to see who's there, who we can, you know, get a photograph with. And then there became a point when people were going to a place like the Louvre just to take a picture. So you would see people in line taking photos of the Mona Lisa, and then you'll see different people taking photos of the person taking photos. So I think even though we're not in these spaces right now, we're not in these galleries, we're not in these museums and other institutions, the absence of our body has the chance to create an opportunity to create a closer connection to the work itself. And that might come out through visual, different virtual exhibitions, conversations like this. This is our first time. I haven't had a conversation with any of you in this type of platform. So this situation has forced us in a way to connect in a way that we haven't, even when we had the opportunity to actually shake each other's hand or hug each other. So I think out of that gratitude for having some type of connection still in this time, the inventive and creative and innovative ways of showing art are going to come forth. We don't know how those will show up yet, but I think it's a chance to really to dig deep because the image seems to be more powerful than ever before. So do words. So with that curatorial practice of words and the image combined, I think that goes on even without us within the immediate presence of the space. So when we get that chance again to be back in that space, we'll have a higher gratitude, and perhaps even a more reverence and respect for the work.
And I like to add that it almost feels like as humans, we were preparing for this moment because we have all this technology already in place. And we've been already kind of working with this technology. So so that's interesting to know. But then also like the level of accessibility. One of my deepest concerns is that the fact that so many people are intimidated to walk into a museum and a gallery. That's why museums have been losing money for over a decade now. And so I think this is exciting in that there will be more people, hopefully, that can engage with all of this wonderful cultural production, and there's more opportunities for education. So I'm really excited about that shift. I've been hosting a series of conversations with Afrofuturists, and the reason I thought about it is because I think that as we are shifting, these conversations like these, the conversations I'm having with Afrofuturists are really helpful to just kind of start thinking through the shift in a different way and then create a different approach to it so that there is less fear, but maybe more kind of action and ability to even just, the action could be just rest, right? But these kinds of reminders that I think that artists have already, with their social practice, have already been doing on the ground, and now we could just bring it into a virtual space. So there's I think the opportunity is great and exciting, and as Danny said, that we can start having virtual exhibitions in virtual reality, like and there, I think it's exciting. I don't want to be like a doom and gloom. I think the dystopian narrative is very Euro-centered and very linear and narrow. So I want us to really think about what are the different possibilities, and especially since we're curators of color, we know that our audience is very small and limited. And so, how do we expand that? And that, I think, is what the true call is at the moment.
I think the key things that you both highlighted was opportunity. I think for me, I've had a number of conversations, and it's not apples to apples, but I think about 2008 when the financial markets just kind of tanked. And everybody was kind of forced to kind of step back and take stock. And I think what's been interesting to see as part of the shifts is just on the basic level, museums and these major layoffs, right? And it begins, at least for me, to beg the question, so how are these things really structured? Is there fragility in the structure? And where is there an opportunity for us as curators to fill in those gaps, I guess? And I don't think it's just like, I've gotten a number of invitations to do like online exhibitions. And for me, I've just been more concerned with like getting closer to artists and curators and deeper dialogue. And so through Art Noir, we started doing these IG Live virtual visits and making it less about us and more about like the artists and what is the artist doing in their studio. How are they navigating it? Because I always feel like they're the ones that are the beacons that are going to kind of help us move through these troubled times, whether it's through music, visual arts, performance. So I've been doing a lot of searching and trying to just see what are artists doing, how can I be of service to help. But then also encouraging artists to like reach out to other curators, because I think this is one of the few times where like you might ask for that studio visit and that's kind of hard to shake it because it's like, well, I got the time. So I've been doing a number of just like online studio visits and learning more about practices that I probably might not have had the time because my practice is so nomadic and I'm in like different places. So I think slowing down, I think has been good about this and really kind of like doing some internal work as a person for me. But then I think also kind of just surveying the landscape and trying to see where's the hockey puck going and where can we kind of like use this as an opportunity to kind of fracture a system that, by design has been exclusionary to us historically. But then also looking at platforms like ADAMA and how do we support, individuals like Fohamu and these institutions who are aiming to celebrate our work, tell our story. So I think for me, I just lean into the uncertainty because so much of how I've just kind of worked the last couple of years has just been like, you just have to kind of freestyle it, figure it out, but make sure that you're working with integrity, you're staying true to yourself, and for me, keeping the artist first and foremost.
Yes, I think I will I share all of your vision, and I will jump on something Ingrid said. When she says has Black curators, first and foremost, our audience is a little bit narrowed. And also, I think with this, let's say, global issue that is affecting us all, we also realize that shift is important in the way we will have to produce cultural content and even art content, because at the end of the day, for me personally, and working at a museum, I realize what we do is kind of privilege. Actually, it's and we belong to a circle, and this opportunity of going global digitally also allows us to break those barriers, between the art world and the rest of the world. Because yes, not everyone has the courage to push the door of a museum or of a gallery. I mean, I live in Marrakech and I work in a museum which is located in a golf resort, so which is the first critique we receive every time. But what we try to achieve with the Macal, for example, we always introduce ourselves as a local museum with a global vision, especially a place where everyone can feel home and everyone is accepted. For example, at the museum, when we have some visitors coming with drivers or taxi drivers, I don't want anyone to stay in the parking. Even the driver has to come in and visit the museum for free. And it's also part of a lot of the different activities by the museum. But again, I think it's now I met you, Larry, I think 4 years ago or 5 years ago in London. And then we've been talking through Instagram, I think, for 5 years too. And this is the first time we all together and reflecting what we're doing and how we can share what we do and how we do it with other people. We have 87 people, 87 people connecting and listening to us now, which will be difficult to do at Macal, in Chicago, in Johannesburg, or in the Bronx right now. So I think it's also an opportunity to, to finally reconnect to, that definition of art as, having a global community and find a way to bring everyone into that community.
This notion of shifting the way we connect and shifting women's opportunity is really interesting. On my Instagram last night, I saw how the Minister of Sport, Art and Culture in South Africa, he's starting this like lockdown gallery to try to connect artists to the public in a different way, and having a call, for artists. So now how are different institutions and entities, maybe establishing connections that may not have existed before, shifting connections. So, the five of us can have a panel discussion, and then I can go, get a cooking lesson from a Michelin chef in Italy, right? And then and then do a tour without even leaving my living room. So I'm really interested to see like how this is going to make some permanent shifts and changes as we move forward.
I think
yeah, Larry.
just to piggyback, I think that's also just kind of an important point, the importance of this kind of cross creative pollination. I know for me, I've been looking towards, what are folks doing in the culinary space, in the music space, in the performance space to engage with their community and trying to see where their insights for learning, but then also just generally what can I learn. So I think that's one thing where I think with this particular moment, we're all, well, most of us, I won't generalize, but most of us are in this learning posture and trying to learn a new skill. Or like, I was on a house party the other night with like some friends who were like not in the art world, and like they were asking questions and they're like, hey, I want to begin to like collect and support, like what should I be doing? And so for me, it's exciting to kind of see people in my network that are not necessarily part of the art world, but are part of other creative spaces now trying to figure out how can we exchange, learn from each other, and then potentially maybe collaborate in the future.
For those of you who are listening, thank you for tuning in with us. If you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A box. This is a great conversation. I'm really appreciative of it. And please support and follow ADAMATL.org. So we actually have a question for Janine, and this is from Lisa Jameson. So she's asking, will Janine share what she learned living in various countries and how they've inspired her creative work? And I really think that actually goes into one of the next things we wanted to talk about, because we wanted to provide space for each curator to go into a little bit of detail, and not just into their practice as a whole, but maybe some projects that they're working on. So we can start off with you, Janine.
Thank you for the question. I think for me, mostly I define myself as a multi-local because, yes, I've lived in so many different places that I think made me, and I'm very happy to be able to dream in 3 languages today, in English, Italian, and French. And in the way I see art and the way I work today at the museum or for the Black History Month in Florence, all those places have influenced me. Let's start with my 10 years in Italy, which was, Italy, Florence, which is the place where I knew that, I wanted to grow professionally in the art world. And Florence is a small city where I also learned and lived the concept of community, because I had a very good community of friends comprised of artists, musicians, creative from different way of life. And that's also why the concept of community is very important in my work when I create or when I curate the educational program for the museum, for example, because I think without a community, we're nothing. And I remember I had a conversation with an artist a few years ago, and he said to me, no one, he won't thank anyone for his career. He made himself, which I understood his point of view, but at the same time, I was a little bit sad about, because I really think we can't, you can be self-made, but you need, what you are, it's a reflection of your interaction with other people. So all those places taught me, how to view the world differently and how to also embrace other people's differences. And to talk about an exhibition that kind of, when I was already in Marrakech, and we did the exhibition called Black Value. I have nothing to show, unfortunately. It's on the website of Black History Month. And at that time, there was a street vendor in Florence called Ididienne. which used to come every day to the studio where I used to work in Florence, the art studio where I used to work. And when we did the exhibition Black Value, a couple of weeks, months after, this street vendor was shot on a bridge in Florence. We're not talking about the US, in Florence. And when I flew back to Florence because I did it, I co-created it with Justin Thompson from Marrakech. And when I flew to Florence to visit what we had done, I mean, I was here, so to see the result, it all made sense, you know, what we're doing in Florence, like by doing the Black History Month, it's important to, you know, give space to Black culture in Italy, because in 10 years in Italy, and it's also in Italy that I realized, I won't say I realized I was Black, but I felt the lack of representation of African culture, not only Black, North African and Sub-Saharan and African American, in the mainstream medias and in the art world. So when we start doing when I joined the Black History Month 5 years ago, it was important for me to, you know, like comment on dit encore, mettre ma pierre à l'édifice, I don't know in English, contribute, you know, to change that narrative and to, I don't know, to, you know, to also show people that Italy is not only about what you see on TV, you know, migrants and street vendors, and on the negativity you can see about migrants or Italian from second generation in Italy. It's a real community that is doing something very meaningful, and that's what we try to achieve with the Black History Month. And when I moved to Marrakech 2 years ago, I didn't know anything about Morocco. I moved here and that was my first time in Morocco. And I also realized I was part of the people who, because when we talk about Black culture, sometimes we tend to forget about North Africa, and I was part of it. But by moving to Morocco and working at the Museum of African Contemporary Art, I realized how important it is to think of Earth as, you know, a whole community. You know, we all, because we share so much. And when I learned about the Casablanca Art School and in the 60s in Morocco, and the Mbari Club in Nigeria in the 60s, or the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s, and the Negritude in Paris in the 30s. Those are movements like from different parts of the history, but that share the same vision that, you know, we have to fight ourselves, but together. So all those places taught me how, you know, to find my community and, you know, fight for it.
Word.
Larry, would you like to expound on that? I know, and actually, I feel like Janine even touched on the next two questions that I wanted to ask, because I did want to get into what your current your current projects are, but also the importance of space and location. So so you can do either or both.
So do you want me to share what I showed you guys before, or something else?
As a matter of fact, before we do that, let's talk about the importance of space and location, because I think that really ties into what Janine was just talking about. Because everyone is in a very particular space, whether it's Johannesburg, Detroit, Chicago, you know, South Bronx, or Morocco. So let's touch on that first.
Yeah. Well, I guess for me, I can talk about, you know, growing up in the Bronx. I actually had an interesting conversation yesterday. I was talking to someone about, you know, at what age do we learn that as human beings that we understand visual culture? And it was, for me, it's become an interesting realization to think about growing up in New York City in the 80s and 90s with graffiti, b-boying, and those were just kind of things that were around me, and not realizing that that was art that was being ideated, that was being created, that was being explored. And so I think I always think about that as kind of a foundational understanding of what art can be. But then I also am cognizant that, like, you know, growing up, I didn't necessarily go to museums voluntarily. And so thinking about that every time when I am making exhibitions, how do you create experiences that are accessible to, you know, a 14-year-old me from the Bronx? And it's been really kind of fascinating to see how technology has kind of accelerated that interest in terms of, you know, Instagram or now TikTok or whatever these tools are, in terms of people questioning what visual culture, visual language, visual identity is, can be, how they can participate and create. So I think being here has been good because my core network is not necessarily interested in art. So I'm always thinking about how can I get them interested and excited or find something that they would be excited about. So it's this constant yearning for creating assets and belonging that I think is catalyzed by, you know, being here, growing up here, and thinking about just the different individuals that I engage on a day-to-day. Dealing, as I was mentioned before, we're in a privileged position. And I think for me, it's a reminder to engage with people who are dealing with day-to-day real stuff. You know, that like whether it is issues around food deserts, lack of access to, you know, healthy food, economic issues. Those are things that, you know, are kind of reminders that the work that I'm doing is a privilege, and how do I use that as a platform to either activate these conversations or at least create kind of a respite for folks who are, you know, dealing with a variety of challenges that just come with just being, you know, human, being, you know, Black in America, Black in the world. And so, yeah.
Ingrid, well, what about you? Because I know, you know, you're engaged with Detroit and Johannesburg, and especially with your, you know, your approach with Afrofuturism. How does location specifically, you know, play a role in how you engage the global African diaspora within your work?
How does location affects my engagement?
Yeah, especially like with the particularities of Detroit. And
yeah, I I think it's really Detroit particularly brings out a certain type of focus simply because the needs are so great. And so and as an Afrofuturist who's not alone in Detroit, there's a very large group of who are working, you know, shout out to all my friends who are dropping off water to people who are still living without water, even though the governor put a moratorium on the water shutoffs. I think, you know, that's the kind of work that's happening. It's very real on the ground work. And so that has been like a very much a focus on how do I further support the activists who are making the lives of our people better. And that's always been a focus of mine. I travel. The reason I'm traveling, I initially, and I did want to go to Kigali, Rwanda, simply because it is probably one of the most Afrofuturist spaces that is growing exponentially. I'm very impressed with the vision of President Kagame, the structure of decentralized government, the healthcare system. It is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, even though they just, they are still healing from a deep, deep trauma that I don't think any of us really can relate to. That right there, there's a lot of similarities. Detroit is still dealing with a lot of trauma. There's a lot of PTSD that we're dealing with, and yet we do not have a fast growing economy, and we have lots of resources. So my work outside of Detroit is constantly me trying to learn about new methods and ways of being, and how to move forward into the future in a very action-oriented way. And hence the reason why I'm on the continent. because Africa is quite literally the future, statistically, in all the ways. And so Johannesburg is an old home of mine. I spent a lot of time here. It's been a couple of years, and it's great to be back. But I came back and I was on lockdown, so I don't have much to say about being here in this present moment. But I'm enjoying this lockdown and looking at Johannesburg at the moment. It's a little surreal because also, you know, being in Africa and watching what's happening in the United States is a very surreal thing, quite honestly. And to be from the United States and to watch it, you're just like, what is going on there? And I'm constantly thinking about how I can support from afar. And because it's really hard to watch. Detroit is one of the hotspots for coronavirus. So that's really hard to handle when my friends are passing away and I'm so far away and I can't do the work that I'm used to doing in person, physically there. But you do what you can from afar.
No, just to piggyback that real quick, I think that's one thing that really has fascinated me about Detroit is just like we've been talking about community, and it's just like community on like another level. And talking to some of your collaborators and colleagues, and like I was talking to one cat, I was talking to Bryce Detroit. He's like, yeah, we're about to do these water drafts. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, there are people with like no water, and so it's just like for me, it's been interesting to kind of have these knowledge exchange. And I think going back to your first question in terms of how has this moment kind of shifted how we work, I think I'm also able to kind of go deeper in certain relationships that probably wasn't able to before because I was like doing 1,000 different things. But to really look at like what's happening in the space and figuring out, as Ingrid was saying, how can you be helpful from afar, make connections, make introductions that might facilitate the execution of things for people who are in need. Yeah.
What about you, Danny, especially in relation to Chicago?
You're on mute.
You're on mute, bro.
You're on mute.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, I just want to say my heart goes out to everyone, even within this panel, and everyone who's listening to not only the literal connections of people we know passing, but just this overall grief that we're experiencing. And Ingrid, I know you have a bright smile and a positive attitude, but I'm from Gary, Indiana, originally. Shout out to Detroit. I have family in Southfield. Detroit was like a second home to me. And I want to start that with Gary, Indiana being this very specific place. And when I was coming up, which was a lot longer ago than people realize, when I was coming up, Gary was 100%, 98% Black city. In particular, I want to say ethnically African American. Meaning descendants of people from the South who were most likely descendants of enslaved and free people from centuries ago. And Gary was this kind of suburb to Chicago. It's about 30 minutes away, maybe 40 minutes drive to my parents' home in this little area called Miller Beach, right across Lake Michigan. And that same lake that connects us to Detroit and Michigan as well. So I grew up in this Black African-American bubble, which meant I saw a different strata, all layers of culture in class. So I saw someone who was unfortunately strung out on drugs. I saw someone who may have been homeless. I also saw doctors, lawyers, CEOs, Black-owned businesses. So this idea of what I could be was never limited to a certain perception from the outside. Unfortunately for me, I had to learn a hard way that I thought like being Black was the most superior thing in the world to be. I didn't understand white supremacy or other supremacy. I was like, hey, I'm me. This is what I'm from. And I walked around with that only to realize that I came from economically a very special place, socially a very special place. If a police officer pulled me over, I was concerned that he knew my dad. I wasn't concerned about being called the N-word or beat. That was my fear. So I grew up in that. And to kind of face a greater reality once I left that bubble some time ago and moved 30 minutes away to the big city, and then throughout the world, I realized there was this connectivity of Blackness globally. And I think Larry mentioned it, definitely Janine and Ingrid, we've all kind of mentioned this idea of how connected we are, not only as diasporians, but those who have never left that place of origin connect with us in this very strong way, because it's not a separation. Situations and time and space, those are all kind of these almost mythological imaginary lines, because we see they dissipate in a time like this when we don't have that physicality. It doesn't matter that Larry's there, Janine's here, we're all here, and we're all under a certain, we're all speaking of a certain condition, and we are speaking with a certain desire, which is something I learned when I traversed the continent of Africa, when I traversed Europe, and also parts in the New World. Before, I had this idea of looking at everything through this African-American bubble. We had the corner on Blackness and hardship. And then, it was ours, and then even the term Black and, that kind of creation of it, that's ours. And completely having all that collapse in so many different ways, living in North Africa for 6 months. Living, being in South Africa, being in West Africa for years and years, several different times. So it caused a breakdown for me. And I realized what was really important is this connective, unifying force that we have to realign ourselves with and remember. I think there was a project to make us forget. And with that forgetting, there's been a forgetting of our own value and our own humanity. So we try to get that value in humanity by ascribing and aligning to something outside of ourselves. But Ingrid just said, Africa is the future, right? And it always has been, the past, the future, the present. There's no separation, just like we're not separated in this grid screen of Zoom. There's no separation from that circle. So I think there's a call to action to get in line with that circle, to review past, to review the current situation, and be very optimistic about a future that won't be without you. There wasn't a past without you. In this new world that we're feeling so subjugated in, couldn't have existed without us. So it's a return of claiming a power. It's a flipping of the switch of acknowledging your own humanity in this, and realizing something that there's an artist named Maria Magdalena Campos Ponce, and she is a Cuban, Afro-Cuban, Black, Latinx woman, artist, creator. She's based in Tennessee, and I got a chance to see her here in Chicago, and she's been all over the world. And she defies what we kind of wanted to say what Latina was, and all these constructions, things that we separate. Oh, you're not Black if you're from the Dominican or from Colombia. You got to be from the US, number one, or if you're African if you're from there. Like, hello, wait a minute, where did this come from? And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, it wasn't even us making these categories. We've subscribed to it out of this forced conditioning of survival, but now we know better. So I have this goal of realizing we know better. So I asked Magdalena, I said, you've been all over the world as a diasporian, where's home for you? Like, how do you connect with home? And she looked at me in a very confrontational way. She said, wherever I plant my feet is home. She said, I didn't need to go to the continent to understand rhythms and things and spirituality. I didn't need to be in America to understand this and that. I didn't need to be in Europe to understand intellectualism or humanism. She said, it's me, it's who I am. I was created. I was this being. I am this Black being, and I'm there if I'm here, with feet on the ground in Cuba, if I'm in Chicago, if I'm in Africa. And then I realized, oh, she's talking about her humanity that comes first above everything. I know we have these titles and these classifications, and sometimes we have devoid of classifications. We don't want to be called certain. Don't call me him, her, I'm they. I get it. That's all great. But we have forgotten this main thing of this soul, this light, which is completely impossible to put out. And we forgot that, and oppressors did not. And I always realized that you only want to oppress something that has great power.
Absolutely.
If it doesn't have power, you don't want anything to do with it. You go on and mind you, but you realize how, I believe in the scheme of things, Black people, people of color, the darkest hue all the way to whatever, have been treated the worst within this scheme. You know, there's levels, and I'm not trying to champion my oppression over someone else's. I understand queer people have had a hard time. I understand women have had a hard time. I understand brown people who are Arab, people who are migrants. I understand all of that, but there's this historic project that has built this contemporary world that says Flint can go without water for years and no one cares. Where was the surrounding shutdown? Where was the mass call? I mean, it could have been a cry out to any corporation could have written a check and handled that. People could have been moved away to fresh water. Caravans could, it's a small place, but you know what? All those, it's about 80% of them, 90% Black. So when are we going to just flip that switch and say, we have to care about ourselves? We have to regain our humanity. We can't look to this broken place to get a healing. We have to heal ourselves, even though it's not fair. It's not right. We didn't do this. None of this is right, but we have a responsibility because the future lies in us hitting that switch. So wherever you plant your feet is home. You make that determination. I don't care if you're in a Starbucks sipping a fancy $5 drink. I don't care if you get your mimosa at the Soho House. I don't care if you are on the corner talking to some young child who thinks the only way they have to make it is selling drugs. Wherever you are is that force of being. And we have to connect with that. And hopefully through art, and Larry said, this interconnection of culture, dance, culinary, all of it. You know, it's more than just this idea of just entertaining us, because it's so funny. Everybody has all this time for creativity now. Because Wall Street saved us. You know, the economy, even your 401k that you watch, let's be honest, we don't know if that's going to exist tomorrow. We're in a very precarious state. But I do know, oh, that brother can sing. Oh, that sister can paint. Oh, that non-binary person's poetry spoke to me as this traditional binary person, you know, and none of it seemed to matter. That Christian, that Muslim, none of that categorical stuff mattered anymore, because the soul, the light of the person, where you plant your feet, is so incredibly powerful. And it took me being around the world to go back to a place like Gary, to sit here in Chicago, to wave at Detroit, and to be in Marrakech, you know, and to be in Ghana, which is like my heart, you know, and to have all those opportunities happen, because at those places, they didn't know I was Daniel Dunson from Gary, son of this person and that. No, they just saw only thing that was in me that was internal and representing. And I found out I can fit in anywhere I was. Even if I was the only one in the room, that's enough. It's okay to be the only one. That's all that you need. Oh, nobody can do what you do. All right, I'm done. I'm sorry.
I think I need a moment, then. I think I need a moment.
Mic drop.
Woo!
I think we done. We done. Thank you.
I warned you yesterday.
Yeah.
I said, you know, give me a
that's
script.
church.
I said, right?
That's church. Yeah. No, but I think what you I mean, you shared so many amazing points, but I think to piggyback that, you know, when I was in Ghana over the holiday, I had a realization because I did the tour of Jamestown, and you know, I grew up in the Ghanaian household, and that comes with its own kind of like idea, construction, whatever. And
paradigm.
You know, paradigm. And you know, the people who live in Jamestown, they're gone, so that's a whole different tribe from being Ashanti. And like doing the tour and learning about, you know, free Brazilians who came back to the continent, right? The 7 ships that I think it was 7 ships that came to Ghana, Togo, Nigeria, and realizing that, you know, we live in a much more creolized environment than we realized. And then it got me thinking about, okay, so now I get it, you know, creating these paradigms and these structures, obviously it's by design, but what happens when you begin to kind of dissipate those things and really think about that humanity that you were talking about, and just, you know, look truly, I mean, it's kind of interesting because when I think about OGs who've always been telling me about the importance of brotherhood, sisterhood, our elders. I've been trying to spend more time with our elders. And they've been talking this to me all my life, and I think I just didn't get it. And it's really interesting to kind of get it at this time in this moment, and then thinking about how do you share those ideas about, home is wherever I put my feet down, and that like I am not inferior. So when I am moving through these spaces, there's really nothing that you can tell me that can take away my humanity, my beauty, my light. And I think that's something that's important to kind of really share, continuously share, not just with artists and artistic practitioners, but just everyday people. Because it's crazy when you have these realizations and it's like you kind of know, but you need something to kind of like trigger it to be like, oh yeah, okay, I see what it is, and now what am I going to do within my power, my creativity to help build on that epiphany that I had, So thank you. I mean, I got to church today.
I think blew up the Q&A.
Janine,
we won't have to need another hour.
I'm telling
Janine,
you.
did you want to share something?
Yes, because I really like the fact that we jump into the concept of home, actually, because it's something that I kind of cherish a lot too. I mean, one of my last Instagram posts actually was about home. Where is home? And because, yes, at the beginning of this crisis, for example, I was supposed to travel to Italy in March, and then I couldn't go home. And I was supposed to be in Paris this weekend, and I couldn't be home again. And when things started to be a little bit complicated, let's say, people kept asking me, oh, are you going home? And I asked myself, where is home? Like, they're asking me if I'm going home. I mean, I'm home in Marrakech. I'm home now. I'm home in France. I'm home in Paris, and I'm home in Cameroon. And the way I like to define home usually, it's where I can rest my head and where, I can have the peace of mind. And we had an exhibition at the end of last year, I think it was in September, at the museum. We curated a show with the recent acquisition of the museum, and I came up with the title, which was Welcome Home. And I was supposed to do a project in Dakar during the Dakar Biennale called Home is Where, ... Because I think it's something that resonates to all of us. And when I came up with the Welcome Home title, I was reading a book of Hans Ulrich in conversation with Edouard Glissant. And the way Edouard Glissant was defining a museum as, a place for global dialogue and a place where the world come into contact with the world. And inside of a museum, we have to multiply the number of worlds. And also it was defining the museum as, like, a museum is not a recapitulation of something which existed, but it's a quest for something we don't know yet. And I think for me, defining a museum like that has a place, as an archipelago, as he said, which bring together so many different influences together to reflect together and, to think about a world has something we have in common. And for me, home could be, what Danny just said. Like, I feel home when he's talking. So my home, it's when he's talking to me because it's touching my soul. And my home is right now on Zoom where I'm with all of you. That concept of home, it's something I think everyone can reflect on it. It's also what we have to reflect on today. Where is home today for all of us?
I think what's so beautiful about what all of you said is that you are speaking, and Maria, I love her work, and her not even being in this panel saying exactly what ADAMA stands for, which is everywhere we go, there we are. The mission of this of this museum, and how your curatorial work is speaking life into that in various ways. I just think it's fascinating, especially with the takeaways that we already got from your personal philosophies of of connectivity and relation, and the importance of brotherhood. You know, I definitely think we need another at least 2 hours to finish this. This is just so.
I think we just need to do a part 2.
Yeah,
Everybody's down.
there are so many amazing questions. What I'm going to do is, especially for the sake of time, hopefully we'll be able to have some more time extension, but I'll ask 3 of questions coming from the Q&A box, and then I will allow anyone to, you know, to take field any one of those 3. So we have from Constance Coulier Mercado. She says, how does your curation make room for the complexity, the good, the bad, the messy at arm's length of Black experiences across the diaspora? How do you make room for our differences in a respectable way? So that's one question. Another question is from Melissa Cobbler, and she's sending us greetings from Montreal. So she says, Audre Lorde quotes, art is not living, it is a use of living. The artist has the ability to take that living and use it in a certain way and produce it. How does this saying stand in the current time? And I think Danny preached to some of that earlier.
I need a collection plate passed around, though. I mean,
for real.
Come on now.
Cash app.
I said that.
Hey.
Cash app.
Hey.
So as I said, ADAMA does have a support button. So if you go to the website, you could definitely support the museum.
Fantastic.
Black Art Now fielded a question from the stream from Ruben Jones. So anyone on the panel, how do you foresee building off of this new digital engagement, growing, transitioning it into physical engagement interactions when stay-home orders are lifted? I think some of us touched on that before, but I think it provides some additional layers in the question. And let's see if I can just find one more. To anyone on the panel, if you taught a masterclass based on your works, what would the curriculum be? The skills that learners would live with. I see Larry smiling hard at that one. So so here's some questions. Anyone?
I'll jump on that, but there's other questions. But I think we can kind of just parry and go back and forth. I think in terms of master class, I've been teaching this workshop that actually evolved from a continuing education class that I taught at SVA that was called The Rules, and that's now evolved to Lead with the Hustle, right? And it starts a little bit about my journey in terms of being self-taught as a curator, working in corporate America, trying to figure out. And Ingrid will know, because we did ICI together when right after I got fired from my job and I had to figure out how am I going to, pay rent. And, the universe worked in such a beautiful way where I was invited to do this ICI intensive, and Ingrid and I did it with a number of other amazing curators 4 years ago, and realizing that curatorial practice wasn't just something that happens within 4 walls. It can happen through this kind of Zoom platform and all the amazing work that we're doing. So now, in terms of that particular workshop, it focuses on frameworks. So what are the frameworks that guide your practice? I think we all should think about, what are the things that help us make decisions? Because at least I know for me, I talk about access, belonging, value, being a catalyst for diversity as part of the framework that guides my practice. And then I talk about storytelling. So what's the story that you're sharing with us through your practice? Whether you're a visual artist, whether you're a curator, whether you're a writer, what have you. And then relationship building, the importance of building true relationships and not just networking and not being transactional, but actually building something that's long-term. Because when I think about, when I kind of formally started in this space in 2008, and look at the relationships that I've built over the last 12 years that are real relationships and artists and colleagues, curators who are now have families and being part of their life, and the ease which now we're able to exchange ideas and collaborate, because a lot of that comes from building trust. And then the last part for that workshop is professionalism. You know, being professional, maintaining your word. So much of this business, if we're talking about arts as an industry, is about trust. It's about the one-on-one, about the human connection, and honoring that. So that's what I've been teaching, and I've actually been trying to refine it because everybody's like, "Yo, you need to come out with a book." And I'm like, "A book about what?" And they're like, "Everything that you've learned, because you've figured out how to navigate this in a way that's allowed you to be sustainable, but then allowed you to really work with a certain level of force that I think just kind of comes through experience and understanding." So yeah, so if you see a book coming out, you guys were the first to get the exclusive.
I love it. I love it. I have a brief. I'm gonna try to make it as quick. Oh, wait a minute. Am I back?
Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. A quick anecdote. And this was one of the last times I was in the public space at a gallery exhibition. Two galleries that are next door to each other had an opening here in Chicago of two different African diasporic artists. One being an artist based in Chicago who's from Puerto Rico, and the other being a group of artists from Brazil. And I was running late to this opening, and I get out of for some reason, a really fancy Uber. I don't know how that happened, but the Uber was fancy that picked me up, and I get out, and then this car pulls past. I was dressed up and everything, and they stopped me, and it was this Black man and his wife, partner, and two children in the back seat. And he said, "Hey, brother, is that an art gallery?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Is there a cover?" And I said, "No, there's no cover charge." And he was like, "I've been driving around. I just got off work, and I'm with my wife and my kids, and we're just driving around seeing what we can do." And he said, "So is it like, can we come in there? Do we have to dress a certain way?" And I said, "No." I said, "Come on in." I said, "Please come in. Park your car around there." I'm pointing, and I said, "This is two great shows going on." And then I went in, I got in there, and about an hour later, I saw that family and moving from both gallery spaces. And there was this little boy who was about 6 years old, and the father was like, "Hey, shake the gentleman's hand. That's the one who told us to come in." And I was, he was greeting me, and I was talking to him about art, showing him different work. And the wife was so happy. She had a glass of wine, and it looked like it'd been one of those days where she needed a glass of wine. And, she was sipping on her wine, and they were just so excited to be in that space. And I thought, wow, what if it had been somebody else who greeted them and not me? And I was thinking, what if it was somebody who was more standoffish, or someone who was more of a gatekeeper, someone who was only interested in someone who's about to buy a piece to come in, someone who is not as welcoming in making that space accessible, And I realized that there's a charge I have to create these spaces of accessibility. And not only that, to educate. So I told them a little bit briefly about the shows, and they said, "Oh, we got to go in there," And then they went into these spaces, and they got to meet two groups of Black artists from all over the world. So to expand their own narrative outside of this, again, this African American bubble. And they were looking at this kind of Black Lives Matter movement going on in Brazil right now, and they can relate to it. And man, it was incredible. And I just thought, what if I wasn't there, And so I think there's a charge for us to be there. And there's a way we can be there digitally. I've done curatorial practices digitally for a while. I didn't want to do a screen thing because I find that complicated, but I did a moment of show and tell. So one of the projects I have is My Granddaddy's Closet, which is this online archive through Instagram that kind of examines a sartorial performance that deals with class, gender, sexuality, racism, oppression, but it all comes out within the way Black men dress around the world. My Granddaddy's Closet. And I have an image here. So I brought a show and tell moment. So like when you this is literally off my walls. This is by an artist, Rob Welsh, here in Chicago. And when you look at this image, that is a collage work of a vintage image of these two Black men together in this certain type of dress. And I thought, wow, you know, this is the type of thing I wanted to talk about. So the digital world allows you to have 10 projects at once. Larry's book project can start off digitally. You know, I have one low key, I'm not ready to talk about yet, digitally. So there's this access that takes away, you know, the gallery should have had someone outside pulling people in instead of me, you know, because those are opportunities. You don't never know where the next sale is coming from. And in a time like this, when things do get up, people are going to be a lot less gatekeeping when it comes to how things are transmitted and sold. It's like, come in here, experience this, you know, because we can't be so closed because we realize how it can all be taken away in a second.
I have a quick question for everybody, if it's of interest. How do you think about creating a multiplier effect? Because the reality is, Danny, you can't be everywhere, you know, and what are some of the things that you're thinking about or trying to do to kind of imbue that sense of hospitality, either with people you work with or colleagues or artists? Because I think that's one thing that we need more of, is just getting people to be in this hospitable posture where, like, you know, it's regardless of how busy or frazzled you are, you do what Danny did and said, come on in. You know, how can we encourage more people to kind of move that way? Or have you done that, thought about that in your practice or things that you do?
I think we got to start with ourselves. Like I said, this is the first time we're able all to talk. You know, I've been in a room with almost everyone, but this is the first time I've had a conversation. We realized we were in Florence together and didn't get a chance to connect at that time 5 years ago, right? So I think we have to drop ego, barriers, self-importance, competition that never existed for us. It's not, no, I'm not in competition with anyone. Only thing I'm competing against is this struggle to affirm myself in a system that says I shouldn't be affirmed. That's your competition, not the person next to you, not the gallery next to you, not the institution. It's a place where you have to look at everyone in this with you as a connective force. When we align ourselves with that, then we'll make sure we're in position to welcome those in, those marginalized people, those disenfranchised people. I don't have time to put a barrier of ego between me and Janine. For what? It doesn't serve anything, and it doesn't even serve me. Like, if I can't learn something from Larry, then who can I go to? I can't go to that other person who has a project against me, you see? So I can't, if I can't turn to the person who's in community with me and get that help and that fortification and that uplifting, then where can I go? I'm lost. There's no reason for any of us to be lost. We have an opportunity to connect together. And once we do that, man, it's limitless to what we can do within the outside of these walls and in the real world.
Janine, based off of Larry's question, Janine, how do you do that at your institution?
Yes, first of all, I want to jump onto what Danny just said and said earlier when he was talking about, you know, inclusivity and, you know, being more inclusive and like having art space being more accessible. I was reading a couple of months ago this essay by Taha Benjeloun about the arts of combat. And in this essay, we were saying the artists need to learn the language of the masses. And I think this applies to all of us, you know, curators, artists, institutions, and critics, because yes, as Ingrid said earlier, and as I said too, we're doing something kind of privileged, and it's up to us to, you know, to learn how to speak to people, how to connect with people. I mean, the public, the audience doesn't have to adapt to what we do, to what the artist is creating, or to what the museum is exhibiting. We have to learn how, you know, to break those boundaries, those barriers, and, you know, to adapt our language, the way we speak and the way we talk about different concepts, to make sure the audience we want to touch can receive the message without, you know, pretending, like you said, pretending to feel like, you know, you belong to the art world. You don't need to belong to the art world to feel the emotion we're trying to communicate, you know. So that's also why I like the writing of the people such as Souleymane Bachir, which I met in Paris last year, and no, 2 years ago actually. And we had a conversation for like maybe 30 minutes, and it's an amazing man and a great philosopher. But the way this man speaks to you, it's so simple. It's so down to earth, and I invited him to write the foreword of our catalog. And when he delivered the paper, he said in a very genuine way, I hope these words, I did it quickly. And it was just perfect because everyone could connect to that. You didn't need to be educated, because that's the point. You know, I see, and I would love to see more, you know, accessible art where we don't need to be as clever, or we don't need to feel, you know, so much educated to interact with an artwork. And I think, yes, it's up to us to also, you know, learn the languages of the masses. And this current situation also push us to reflect on that, you know, how will we adapt everything we do to the current situation? So how will we, because for example, now that the museum is closed in Marrakech, we have a very important educational program where comprised of school visits and couscous and art, which is an initiative we created 2 years ago with the aim of gathering different communities in Marrakech, such as migrant taxi drivers, gardeners, and, you know, stay-at-home women from the Medina, or even kids from the Medina. And so different communities, and invite them to the museum, you know, to discover what we do, but by using something very simple, such as the couscous, because in Morocco, in Marrakech, Friday is for couscous. So for me, it was, and I also studied sociology. So how do you speak to someone who don't really speak your language as, you know, an art professional? So you have to adapt what you do to the audience you want to touch, because at the end of the day, if what we do is only for us all in the art community, what are we doing that?
We have until 1:20. So what I want to do is I want to give Ingrid some space to maybe provide some final comments, and I'll provide some takeaways, and then close it out.
Okay, awesome. Sorry, my internet is beginning to become unstable. Everyone's getting on right now, so I just wanted to just kind of give my own final thoughts. I'm answering a couple of questions someone asked about Afrofuturism and Larry, your multiplier effect, and the masterclass. So one of the things that I'm into is applied Afrofuturism. So Afrofuturism is a way for creating new destinies for Black bodies. And Danny, just a little pushback on the Black body usage is really, I'm being very specific about Black body, the physical body. I'm not talking about the mind or the soul. And the reason is because that is what brings us the violence. That is what people are reacting to, is the physical body, and it's cold, and that seems very dehumanizing. And that is exactly what I'm pointing to. And really wanting to figure out ways to make sure that we're humanizing. And that's me using Afrofuturism to create those new relationships to the Black body, as I said before. And so for me, you know, one of the things that people really have a question about is like, what is Afrofuturism? And how I've had asked the question, you know, how can I become an Afrofuturist? How can I bring that into my daily life? And I'm actually constructing a workshop on just that, on how to apply Afrofuturism to your life. And I think this is a really beautiful time to do that, simply because we're kind of living in a very surreal science fiction kind of space right now, right? And Afrofuturism is a healing technology as well. So it really will help us to move through this while always healing ourselves, because I think we're in a moment of shock to some degree. So I really love it as a technology for that reason. And because it pulls together past, present, future It's nonlinear. And it really does look at indigenous knowledge, ancestral technologies, legends and fantasies and magical realism and horror, while also looking at the intersection of race and technology and science, which is all extremely relevant right now. So that is a class that I'm developing right now, and I'm really excited about really kind of showing people how to bring Afrofuturism into the next space. And you know, in a place, Detroit is facing 64% poverty rate if you add the working poor. So in terms of imagining futures, if you talk to many of the youth there, it's a very, very dystopian because it's very much within their very hyper-local space that they're seeing, and then they're hearing from adults a lot of negativity. It is extremely important for a place like Detroit, and I think we have pockets all over, that we start imagining these kinds of new futures and really making sure that these futures are accessible. And we're, because we're moving into a shift into an era that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if COVID-19 ever ends. We don't know anything, right? And so what are the tools necessary for us to adjust to that? And so that's why I'm very much I've always directed all of my work to the masses, my language, my writing, my everything, because I need the multiplier effect. I need us to exercise our imagination collectively, heal and imagine new kinds of futures for Black bodies. One, the Black body can never be liberated unless everyone is liberated. And so Afrofuturism is definitely for everyone. And that's something that I always like to state. My audiences tend to be quite majority white when I'm speaking. And Bryce actually asked this question of when we had like majority white men in an audience one time. And one guy was like, I come from a very racist classes kind of, background with all kinds of limiting beliefs, and I'm trying to find liberation. And he's looking through using Afrofuturism as that form of liberation. So we have this opportunity to make sure that even more people have access to the information, have more access to the cultural production. And again, I think this is a really, really important moment. It's very critical, and I'm excited about everyone's work because we're present, and we're trying to figure it out in the moments, and as well as trying to prepare for a new type of future, hopefully with destinies that are healthier and more prosperous for Black bodies.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. A great way to close. I'm thinking of Ingrid's Manifest Destiny exhibition, where Alicia Wormsley has this massive billboard, and it simply says, "Black people are the future. The Black people are in the future." And I think this is such a beautiful thing, to be able to come together to discuss the complexities of our experiences and how you curate them in a very tangible way for many communities to be able to intake and process and internalize. What I want to do is I would like to provide some takeaways from the panel, and I will do a closing. Also, I know that there were so many amazing questions that were in the Q&A, and we will actually be mining all of these questions. So please stay tuned. So they will be answered in some form. So in terms of takeaways, I believe in fluidity. So I want to start with last week's panel, some of the takeaways that I got from there, and kind of fold them into how they connect with yours. In last week's panel, they discussed the importance of ancestral veneration and mining our Blackness and cultural identity through our history. It was a common thread among all the artists. In terms of the ancestors, it was stated, we exist because of them, and they continue to exist because of us. Also, it was stated that creating images of ourselves based on how we see ourselves as opposed to being objectified by other people. And I think that was specifically said by Alexei Peskin. So the takeaways that I got from today's panel, creating portals of liberation in relation to the Black body, owning our own intellectual property. Okay, home is where we place our feet. I don't even know if I can say it as beautiful as Danny. And the importance of creating spaces of accessibility and opportunity, and from Janine, without the community, we are nothing. So these are some of the takeaways that I got from all of you, and I want to leave you with two stories, and then we can go. Especially in terms of without community, we are nothing. Erica Moya James, she's a curator and art historian out of University of Miami. She is curating an exhibition on Caribbean art in Tent in Rotterdam. So she wasn't able to join us, but we had a conversation and wanted to really include what the Caribbean voice and the Caribbean art in terms of the global African diaspora is, how we engage with this as well. And she was talking about this notion of community when creating this exhibition, and the exhibition is titled The Visual Life of Social Affliction. And she was like, upon installing and preparing for it in Rotterdam, there's this large community of people of Caribbean descent who live in the Netherlands. So she wanted to think of ways to acknowledge, engage, and include that community to talk about the dynamics of what does it mean to be Caribbean, particularly in that space, right? In Rotterdam and in the Netherlands as a whole. So in thinking of the conversation that I was having with her, it really it stood out the point that that Janine made in terms of without community we are nothing, because connecting a local community, with a larger thread of what you're trying to do, with your exhibition and with your curatorial practice it's a consistent theme. Larry mentioned that, Ingrid mentioned that, Danny mentioned that, and Janine talks about the importance of that, within your curatorial practices. So I'm really appreciative that community and connection kept coming up. And I think that community and connection is actually why we even know each other. So 2015 was Black Portraitures in Florence, Italy. I had an opportunity to present at that conference, and that's where I met Fahamu. But also Danny and Janine was there as well. We didn't even meet each other, so the Danny and Janine, but the space that was being created to just work through what does it mean to be Black in the world, and how are these creators and thinkers are using their creative practices to engage global Black experiences. It was such a beautiful thing, and to be able to create this notion of home, and home is where you place your feet. I saw myself as so comfortable within that space in Florence because of who I was around and who I was with, and the connections that were made. And I saw that play out in so many different ways, and particularly when we all traveled together to Venice to go to the Biennale. So seeing Oakley and Wazer's directing of the Venice Biennale at the time, the first Black man to direct the exhibition, and to see so many artists of African descent throughout the globe being represented at the Biennale. There were several artists, Black artists, who won awards that year. And even when I walked into the Biennale space, the very first artist that greeted me was the Norway Pavilion, and I think it was I think the title of the piece was Rapture by Camille. Her last I think it's Camille Morant. So it was this beautiful the white frames with the it had like the shattered glass on the floor, and the audio that was coming of it, and it was from a Black artist but representing the Norway Pavilion. So we were not just in terms of Africa, or not just in terms of, but the way we represented throughout the globe. And it felt so comfortable interacting with people who look like me from all over parts of the world as we answered these questions of what does it mean to be Black in these spaces. So you know, in the wake of Oakley and Wazer, and in the wake of David Driscoll, I'm so honored that you are all representing the present and future of curatorial practices as we all navigate what it means to be in the space and celebrating the beauty, you know, of our past and the beauty of our presence, you know, and to make it very clear that, you know, Black people are going to be in this future. So I really thank you all for this panel. The questions are going to be mined and will be on a platform, and ADAMA will keep you posted. If you do want to join any future salons, please go to adamatl.org/events. And there's also a support button on their website as well. Thank you very much for participating. I can't thank you enough. And we will stay connected after we leave this meeting. And hopefully we'll stay connected with the others who are watching from all over the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We love you, man.
Thank you, Michael, Fahamu, Adama. Thank you guys, Janine, Danny, Ingrid, everybody. It continues.
Ditto.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely Sunday.
Thank you all. I appreciate it so
Bye-bye.
much. It's so great to connect with everyone. And let's make sure we stick even closer within our distance. There's a way to be even closer to each other. So I need everybody.
You guys were amazing, amazing, amazing. Pastor Danny Dunson, I'll be at church next week. So
Don't come up there with no money. I'm just saying. I'm coming in. If you don't have nothing to drop in that tray, in fact, pay in advance.
And they got 2 collections going on. It's gonna be 2.
I mean, I need a haircut. Send a barber.
Are we still online? Are we still live? Or is
I hope not.
It's not recording anymore though. The recording is stopped.
Are we still